A line has been drawn. In the warm and historically contested waters of the Caribbean Sea, a perilous game of provocation and power, previously confined to the shadows of diplomacy and economic espionage, has now reached its zenith. This is no longer a subterranean crisis whispered in the corridors of Washington and Beijing. It is an overt confrontation, unveiled beneath the tropical sun for the entire world to witness and grasp its profound implications. The United States Navy, in a display of force unparalleled in decades, has not only positioned itself to safeguard its interests in the venerable Monroe Doctrine, but to directly challenge the Chinese squadron that dared to intrude into its strategic backyard. What just a few months ago manifested as tensions characterized by economic sanctions, accusations of corporate espionage, and diplomatic disputes has now transmuted into an imminent and palpable naval engagement. Pentagon intelligence reports confirm, through satellite imagery and electronic surveillance, that a Chinese naval task force, including some of its most advanced Type 055 destroyers, dubbed aircraft carrier killers, and Type 054A frigates, is already present in Venezuelan waters. This naval formation, the pinnacle of Chinese maritime modernization, is not merely a presence. It is an unequivocal declaration of intent. In response, the U.S. Southern Command, SOUTHCOM, has elevated its alert level to DEFCON 3, mobilizing naval and aerial assets from strategic bases in Florida, Puerto Rico, and the Guantanamo Naval Base in Cuba. Washington, with calculated determination and assuming colossal risk, is testing the limits of Beijing's patience and the continued validity of the Monroe Doctrine, a cornerstone of American foreign policy that has endured for 2 centuries and now faces its most rigorous scrutiny. This exhaustive script will not only recount real-time events but will dissect the intricate layers of complexity underpinning them. We will analyze how this standoff was meticulously orchestrated over 2 decades of Chinese investments in Latin America, transforming the region from a mere commodity supplier into a geopolitical battleground. We will delve into the economic, ideological, and strategic motivations driving Xi Jinping's audacity, who perceives in Venezuela a golden opportunity to redefine the global order. And, crucially, we will evaluate the potentially devastating consequences that a single miscalculation, a misinterpreted warning shot, an accidental collision between vessels, or an uncontrolled rhetorical escalation could unleash upon global stability, with the very real risk of a conflict between nuclear powers. Prepare to comprehend the fundamental reason why the U.S. Navy is confronting the Chinese fleet. It is, in essence, the boldest maneuver on the vast geopolitical chessboard of the 21st century. It is a move that compels America to make a decision, placing it before an unbearable dilemma: to retreat and accept the demise of its undisputed primacy in the Western Hemisphere, setting a dangerous precedent for other powers, or to advance and risk a direct conflict with a rival nuclear power, with incalculable human and economic costs. Join us in this meticulous analysis to unravel the complexities of this critical juncture, where rhetoric has materialized into reality, and warships resonate more powerfully than diplomats, echoing the drums of a new Cold War. The spark that ignited the fuse of counter-escalation originated from a stage already notorious for its fiery rhetoric, a political rally in Florida, a state with a sizable and influential Cuban and Venezuelan diaspora, critically important for U.S. politics. Donald Trump, in the midst of his campaign, announced a massive and unprecedented expansion of military presence off the coast of Venezuela, with the objective of eradicating drug trafficking, dismantling terrorist networks, and stifling the tyranny that oppresses the Venezuelan people. This declaration, far from being mere political bravado, materialized into tangible actions within hours. Commercial satellite images from Maxar Technologies, swiftly analyzed and disseminated by specialized outlets such as Naval News and the War Zone, confirmed what many had anticipated. Carrier Strike Group 10, CSG-10, spearheaded by the imposing nuclear-powered supercarrier USS George Washington, CVN-73, was deployed from its home port in Norfolk, Virginia, to the southern Caribbean. The strike group did not sail alone. It was escorted by at least one Ticonderoga-class cruiser, the USS Philippine Sea CG-58, equipped with the advanced Aegis combat system, capable of tracking and engaging multiple targets simultaneously, and a squadron of Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, including the USS Farragut, DDG-99, and the USS Forrest Sherman, DDG-98, armed with Tomahawk cruise missiles. Additionally, Pentagon sources confirmed the presence of the fast attack submarine USS Newport News, SSN 750, a Los Angeles-class submersible, whose stealth mission is to track and, if necessary, neutralize submarine threats. A clear allusion to any Chinese submarine that might be accompanying the fleet. The U.S. Southern Command, SOUTHCOM, headquartered in Doral, Florida, issued an official communique asserting that the operations, christened Operation Freedom Sentinel, aimed to guarantee security, stability, and freedom of navigation in the Western Hemisphere, in strict accordance with international law. The communique, however, contained a phrase unequivocally directed at Beijing. Any foreign state actor attempting to destabilize the region and support illicit regimes will face a firm and forceful response. The message was crystal clear. Washington was rising to the challenge, positioning its most formidable pieces on the Caribbean chessboard. For the Venezuelan government, now visibly emboldened by Chinese backing, the arrival of the American fleet was interpreted by Maduro as a desperate declaration of a hunt by a declining empire. The popular reaction, orchestrated by the government, was not long in coming. Tens of thousands of Venezuelans, driven by a sense of nationalism and resistance, flooded the streets of Caracas. Banners proclaiming no to U.S. invasion resonated with the sentiment of a people who, despite profound internal divisions, united against a perceived external threat. State television, for its part, continuously broadcast Maduro's speech, in which he promised to fight to the last bullet, rhetoric designed to galvanize internal support and send a signal of intransigence to Washington. This Venezuelan mobilization, however, was not limited to protests and speeches. In direct response to the growing American military presence, Venezuela announced large-scale military exercises, dubbed Bolivarian Shield, on La Orchila Island. These maneuvers, which included the participation of various units of the Bolivarian armed forces, were presented as a demonstration of defensive capability and a warning that the country would not be an easy target. The official Venezuelan rhetoric, amplified by state media, emphasized national sovereignty and the right to self-defense in the face of what they considered imperialist aggression. The tension in the atmosphere was almost palpable, and the world watched with apprehension, aware that any miscalculation could transform this rhetorical and military escalation into a conflict of unpredictable proportions. With each approaching vessel, with each more incisive declaration, the Caribbean was transforming into a chessboard where moves were calculated, but consequences were uncertain. And in this scenario of uncertainty, a new player, until then lurking, was about to make its move, completely altering the game's dynamics. As tensions between Washington and Caracas appeared to reach their climax, a new and unexpected actor burst onto the global stage, drastically altering the conflict's dynamic: the People's Republic of China. As reported by the Financial Times, Beijing's incursion was not discreet, but a calculated exhibition of force and intent. Official communique from Beijing confirmed the dispatch of numerous Chinese naval vessels to the Atlantic, under the pretext of conducting joint exercises and safeguarding trade routes. Nevertheless, internal sources within the Chinese government, cited by the South China Morning Post, were more explicit, asserting that this was not merely a symbolic presence, but direct military support for Venezuela. China's motivation for this audacious intervention is multifaceted, complex, and deeply rooted in its long-term strategic and economic interests. A high-ranking Chinese official, speaking on condition of anonymity, summarized Beijing's stance with candor. China will not tolerate investments worth tens of billions of dollars being jeopardized by a change of political regime in Caracas. This assertion is not empty rhetoric. Over the past decade, China has injected over $70 billion into Venezuelan oil and gas projects, in addition to financing infrastructure and telecommunications programs. These investments are not solely financial in nature. They represent a fundamental pillar for China's energy security and the expansion of its global influence. Venezuela, possessing the world's largest proven oil reserves, is an invaluable strategic partner for Beijing, ensuring the supply of vital resources for its burgeoning economy and consolidating its presence in a region traditionally dominated by the United States. In Caracas, Chinese support was met with jubilation and relief. At a press conference, Nicolas Maduro, ostentatiously displaying a state-of-the-art Huawei smartphone, publicly thanked the Chinese government, declaring, "China is our elder brother, our strategic ally with whom we will build the multipolar future and justice for the peoples of the world." This meticulously orchestrated moment was immediately broadcast live and in primetime by Chinese state television CCTV, presented as a symbol of the unbreakable alliance between both countries against imperialist and hegemonic U.S. aggression. This narrative not only reinforces the legitimacy of Maduro's regime internally but also projects China's image as a responsible global superpower, willing to directly confront Western power to defend its allies and a new model of global governance. Washington Post analysts observe that, although Maduro's gestures may seem largely symbolic, they conceal a serious military political strategy. China, by openly positioning itself in defense of Venezuela, is sending a clear message to the world. Its sphere of influence is no longer limited to Asia. This is a paradigmatic shift in Chinese foreign policy, which traditionally focused on regional issues and non-intervention. Now Beijing demonstrates a growing willingness to project its military and economic power on a global scale, challenging the established order and seeking a more prominent role in global governance. Venezuela in this context becomes a strategic focal point, not only for its natural wealth, but as a springboard for the projection of Chinese power in the Western Hemisphere, literally in the backyard of the United States. This Chinese audacity not only reconfigures the balance of power in the region, but also raises profound questions about the future of global geopolitics and the possibility of a new Cold War, with flashpoints in unexpected locations. In Washington, China's eruption into the Venezuelan scenario was not met with indifference, but with escalating alarm reverberating through the halls of power. The Pentagon, in particular, observed with considerable unease the movement of the Chinese fleet in the Atlantic. Reports from Pentagon officials indicated that U.S. vessels had already commenced operations to intercept and, if necessary, destroy Venezuelan boats allegedly transporting drugs and weapons. This action, though publicly justified as part of anti-drug efforts, carried an implicit message of warning and a show of force. However, behind the scenes, a far more momentous and complex question loomed over the U.S. Capitol. Would the United States risk a direct confrontation with China if Chinese forces genuinely mobilized to defend Venezuela? The Wall Street Journal, citing sources from the National Security Council, revealed that in private, then-President Trump had weighed a scenario of a limited naval blockade. Nevertheless, his advisors reportedly warned of the catastrophic consequences if even a single Chinese destroyer were damaged. The specter of the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 hovered, reminding everyone of the swiftness with which a regional crisis can escalate into a global confrontation with nuclear potential. Beijing's daring, willing for the first time in its history to challenge Washington not only for its own interests, but in defense of a country in another hemisphere, was something previously considered unthinkable. This paradigm shift, according to experts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, indicates that China is transitioning from a policy of regional defense to one of global expansion. Venezuela, with its vast oil reserves and strategic location in the U.S. backyard, has become the epicenter of this new strategy. Meanwhile, the crisis reverberated in other global capitals. Within NATO, the debate was intense and exposed profound divisions. According to Politico, in the corridors of Brussels, allies failed to reach a consensus. The United Kingdom and Poland, aligned with a firmer U.S. stance, insisted on the necessity of a collective response in case of confrontation with China. On the other hand, Germany and France adopted a more cautious approach. A source from the German Foreign Ministry stated that Berlin considered it madness to fight China over Venezuela. Paris, in turn, proposed a diplomatic mission to mediate between Washington and Beijing, seeking a solution that would avert military escalation. This division within NATO underscored the complexity of the situation and the reluctance of some European powers to involve themselves in a direct confrontation with China over an issue they considered distant from their immediate interests. In Latin America, opinions were equally polarized. According to El País, Cuba and Nicaragua officially expressed their willingness to provide Venezuela with infrastructure for joint defensive actions, strengthening ideological and strategic ties with Maduro's regime. In contrast, countries like Peru and Chile feared that the presence of Chinese vessels could militarize the entire region and trigger an arms race, further destabilizing a continent already prone to instability. This regional polarization reflected the influence of different geopolitical blocs and the complexity of international relations in Latin America. Global markets, always sensitive to any indication of instability, reacted immediately. Bloomberg observed that investors were pricing in the risk of a large-scale conflict that could paralyze oil supplies from the region, causing a devastating impact on the world economy. Foreign Affairs magazine, in its latest issue, grimly summarized the situation. We are witnessing the dawn of a new Cold War, but with a flashpoint in the Western Hemisphere. The comparison to the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 was inescapable, but with a crucial difference. Instead of secret Soviet missiles, we had the modern invisible Chinese fleet. And instead of Cuba, we had Venezuela. The question increasingly posed in world capitals was whether this localized crisis would escalate into a global confrontation. The answer remained uncertain, but one thing was clear. Humanity had entered a new and dangerous phase where every misstep could lead to catastrophe. The Venezuelan crisis, with the unexpected and audacious Chinese intrusion, is not merely a regional conflict. It represents a crucible for one of the oldest and most fundamental pillars of United States foreign policy, the Monroe Doctrine. Proclaimed in 1823 by President James Monroe, this doctrine established that any intervention by European powers in the affairs of the Americas would be considered a hostile act against the United States. For nearly 2 centuries, the Monroe Doctrine served as the cornerstone of American hegemony in the Western Hemisphere, shaping power relations and ensuring that no external power could challenge Washington's influence in its own sphere of interest. Now, with Chinese warships traversing the Caribbean and Beijing openly declaring its military and economic backing for Venezuela, the Monroe Doctrine is being challenged in an unprecedented manner. Bloomberg analysts contend that the current crisis could become a watershed moment for global geopolitics. If China successfully defends Venezuela, this will signal the effective collapse of the Monroe Doctrine, opening the doors to a new era of multipolarity in Latin America. This would imply that the United States would no longer be the sole power with the right to intervene or influence the affairs of the region, and other major powers such as China and even Russia could establish their own spheres of influence. Conversely, if the U.S. manages to overcome Venezuelan and Chinese resistance, this would send an unequivocal message to all countries in the region. Washington remains the master in its hemisphere. Such an outcome would reaffirm the Monroe Doctrine and American primacy, but at a potentially very high cost, both in terms of resources and global reputation. The dilemma is profound. Yielding to Chinese influence would mean accepting an erosion of American hegemony, while directly confronting China could lead to a conflict of catastrophic proportions. Washington's choice will not only impact Venezuela, but will redefine the U.S. role in the world and the structure of the international order. This situation is further complicated by the fact that, amidst the events in Venezuela, former President Trump was actively campaigning, with the central theme of a strong hand against dictators. His speeches were replete with incisive declarations. We will not allow China to interfere in our region. Venezuela will be free. This rhetoric, while potent for his electoral base, concealed a complex strategic dilemma. The question was not merely whether the U.S. should confront China, but whether it could do so without triggering a large-scale war. The stakes are high, and the outcome of this crisis will define the future of global geopolitics for decades to come. To better understand how these tensions can affect your daily life and the future of the global economy, continue following our in-depth analyses. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any updates on this and other crucial topics. Amidst the military and diplomatic escalation, another contest unfolded with equal intensity: the struggle for narrative. The gravity of the situation led many analysts to draw parallels with the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. Foreign Affairs magazine, in its latest edition, did not hesitate to assert, "We are witnessing the dawn of a new Cold War, but with a flashpoint in the Western Hemisphere." The comparison is inescapable and overwhelming. The crucial difference, however, lies in the actors and the instruments. Instead of secret Soviet missiles, we have the modern and visible Chinese fleet. And instead of Cuba, we have Venezuela, a nation rich in resources but economically fragile. This analogy with 1962 serves as a somber warning, but also as a weapon in the propaganda war. In Caracas, state media incessantly broadcast images of the Chinese vessels, extolling Beijing's fraternal support and comparing the alliance to Cuba's resistance in 1962. Newspapers like the Cuban Grama characterized the event as the beginning of a new era of multilateralism. Venezuela's Minister of Defense, Vladimir Padrino, declared that joint exercises with China would be a guarantee of peace, a statement that, for Washington, sounded like a direct provocation. Conversely, Washington's rhetoric, personified by Trump, was equally incisive. In his rallies, he hammered home the message of a tough hand against dictators, with speeches such as, "We will not allow communist China to interfere in our region. Venezuela will be free." This duality of narratives created an ideological battlefield where truth was often molded to serve political interests. On social media, armies of bots linked to both sides flooded platforms with disinformation, seeking to influence global public opinion and justify the actions of their respective governments. Consequently, the world holds its breath. We are witnessing the emergence of a new and dangerous phase in the confrontation between great powers, with Venezuela, unexpectedly, at the center stage. The primary question, still unanswered, is whether the United States will go to the ultimate lengths to respond to the challenge posed by China. History teaches us that in moments of crisis like this, every movement, every word, every decision can have global repercussions. Humanity has entered a stage where a misstep in the Caribbean can, indeed, lead to a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. To understand the next moves in this deadly game of chess and how they might affect the future of the economy and global peace, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications.